There were and are many men and women who attempted to share information with the general public, but were met with walls of blank stares in public forums. And as the internet expanded in its reach, speed, and content, in many ways it became more difficult to reach an audience. There has been another side to your government you've never seen, you've never been exposed to. A gray area with muted surroundings and vanilla content, the opposite of the bright neon flash of distraction. Many have heard of this other side through movies and books, fringe avenues classified as too crazy to comprehend, yet interesting for entertainment. There are projects that have been built and expanded throughout the years by the military-industrial complex. Trillions in black budget spending has taken place and the public has never been notified. Instead, we've been preoccupied with TV babble and entertainment, the political circus, and all the other trappings of an invisible serfdom. Skunkworks is the name given to these dark projects, and from there they branch like tendril shadows, experimental mechanisms that have ensured the future of the human race will not end well for humans.
Project Invisibility actually began in 1931. The technical director of the project at a later date was Nikola Tesla. Tesla was working at that time in the University of Chicago with Dr. John Hutchinson, who was the dean of the university's School of Engineering, and a staff physicist by the name of Dr. Emil Kirchenauer. These people, including Tesla, got together for a theoretical discussion of, can you make an object invisible, and if so, how do you do it? The history of Nikola Tesla is very interesting. He decided to go back into, shall we say, the free energy business, and in 1931 he took a PSR automobile, ripped out the standard engine, put in a 75 horsepower electric motor, and they had a little black box, his free energy device, if you will, derived from the work he had done in the period around the turn of the century, on which Mr. J.P. Morgan wanted no part. Built this black box, converted the car to an electric motor, and had this place in the car in the dashboard for those who saw it. We put this black box and plugged it in and then turned it on, and it provided the power for the 75 horse electric motor and drove the PSR all over New York City and eventually all over New York State without any gasoline, without any visible source of power except what he picked up. This part was documented much later by some Japanese in a video which was done many, many years later, and they said Tesla did it better than any of us, and nobody knows how he did it. That apparently was a secret that died with him. He also developed a particle beam weapon system, which he attempted to sell to the U.S. government. First they were interested, then turned it down. This is a 1935-36 period, while he was working on Project Invisibility. They turned it down, the Canadians turned it down, the British government turned it down, but believe it or not, the Russian government bought it and snapped it up for $25,000 cash. Can you imagine, in view of what the financial structure is today, him selling a working model on a year's consultancy for a particle beam weapon system to the Russians or anybody for $25,000 cash? He was very hard up for money at that time. And eventually his own government gave him a stipend, which kept him alive, so to speak, during that period of time, after his paycheck was no longer available from RCA.
So how about in the aspect of the experiments that dealt in mind manipulation? I mean, to what extent what was your involvement in that?
Well, recently I've come to kind of an understanding and settling that the process of this connection, certainly metaphysics, time is all connected. The past, present, future is interconnected. And those people who can access it more than the typical sensitive does, or psychic or sensitive or has capabilities.
There's an electromagnetic connection.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. You're very much electromagnetic based. Being involved in the Philadelphia experiment in this time phenomenon and jumping and right along the time framework for which we're now involved in here. Mm-hmm. I would have the potential capabilities to do the psychic work on a bigger potential than most people would. Mm-hmm. So coming from the 40s into the 80s, and then having to process one of the times that for some reason I lost my time reference, and the body aged very dramatically and ended up for some reason back in the 60s. For reasons, I guess it makes sense. We figured within that 20-year cycle of 43, 63, 83. And curiously enough, there's all sorts of tests that Preston has where he and I can validate consideration of things that I do know and figure as a reference of sort. In the early 60s, I don't identify with much of everything. It goes along with the half a dozen or 5 or 6 different memories I have before the age of 13.
That are all different. Or
Sorry?
what?
No, it's just basic memories of childhood that are just not there for reasons not known.
Okay.
But the process of what Preston earlier spoke about, these random thought processes that occurred in different aspects of time, as with the can of beer, it would be a natural phenomenon for the psyche, which had been actually exposed to the esoteric in a broader way than most people, to almost play, go out, take a job and just see what happens, put it out, as in the supposedly the evolution of the human spirit to go into these different realms, which the human spirit does have a natural connection to, all these alternate and the timeline and stuff. But to given a work duty, just kind of do it on almost an experimental, the creation aspect of it without being contained, and therefore the kind of the advent of the time experiments, which ended up in certainly the mundane to the phenomenon of going and jumping planets and moving into different time zones, of which, as I say, it's a natural occurrence that everyone has, and
that we haven't realized.
Everyone does. Yeah. The human spirit is so very connected, and supposedly that's some of the interests of the ET groups, that the human spirit that we're evolving in this process has such a vast number of emotions with it. In the love, I hate you, it's so very evident in a child, in that they don't understand that. It's so very extreme in nature, and of course that extremity is part of creation, in that hopping back between the 2 points, there's all sorts of room for doing work and such. So, one of the unusual characteristics in this jumping in time and seeing where the particular special interest groups, and that's basically what Montauk was about, very specialized interest groups within the government, outside, finding a way to accentuate and to gear and maneuver their own sense of for whatever their agenda is. There was a test at Montauk for those people who could sense in this time framework, which we're all moving along, to the year 6037. Sounds kind of kooky and bizarre and unusual, but we all have a connection to our evolution, and that's supposedly one of the most evolved states of the human spirit in the time framework that's moving along. Everyone has a connection to it, and there is enough kind of horsepower or a process to move it in that area, then could be on paper connected. And it probably was a bit of a jolt and such, but they had these connections, and part of the work duties of some of these volunteers were to go in and sense this horse on a pedestal, which in this kind of surrealistic city, and some of the people had the creativity and the how do we say, and the ability to actually ride the horse.
I met Phil over the telephone approximately 3 years ago, and in person about 2 years ago. And during that period of time, I became very well acquainted with him. He was, at that time, still working for the government, and he didn't say much about what he did. But nonetheless, over a period of time, I became well acquainted with him. I found him to be a person of integrity and honesty. And about 1 year ago, he became totally fed up with the New World Order and the establishment. He thought he was working for the betterment of mankind and the work that he was doing as a geologist for our government as well as for NATO. And he found out that it could be and was actually anything but that. So his revelations became, in many respects, my revelations. And I urged him last winter and spring to go public and lecture. Finally got him out. He's given over 30 lectures to date, all very successful, very interesting. In fact, so successful there have been 13 attempts on his life since the beginning of the year, and he's survived them all. All I can say is God must be protecting him because he has a message. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Phil Schneider, and understand also everything is being recorded and the video and audio tapes will be available later.
I'm Phil Schneider. I worked 17 years for the United States government as a geologist and aerospace engineer as well as a structural engineer. I worked for such elusive occupations with Morrison Knudsen, Bechtel, Page & Page, Aerospatiale of France, and a host of other, EG&G and a host of other, Los Alamos Laboratory and these kind of things. But rather than bore you with all those statistics, I've got cooked up a real mixed bag here of different topics, and it's might be a little bit like brain overload, but I'll start from the beginning. Now, like I said, I worked 17 years, co-invented methods of shape charge blasting as well as laser rock deflagration, which means rock is literally melted or powdered by a special residue laser combination underneath is applied as a coating, as a liquid coating, kind of like instant agate, if you could imagine a hunk of agate, which is a hard silica mineral, rock actually. But up here we have another topic. This is an area to where I worked. I worked 11 years of the 17 years at Groom Lake, S4, S2. It's in the Nellis Air Force Base area. In fact, Groom Lake is, I'll show you in the picture right here. It's right here. Groom Lake is quite the place. A lot of rumors and other kinds of things have come out of there. Of course, people have stood on the outside for years and wondered at what's been flying there. There's all kinds of things been flying. Let me give you a brief overview. Start in ancient history land here. Back in 1909, the U.S. cavalry was engaged in catching some banditos that had crossed over the Mexican border into a place called Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. And they went into a cave or a hideout and killed the so-called bandits, but what they found out they couldn't explain, and they were called horseshoe craft at that time, or horseshoe ships. There were UFOs, and they saw these, what they called demons, gray demons, little gray guys all around the place. That was in 1909. Now in 1933, our government was actively engaged with the Europeans, mostly the French and the English, in special researches dealing with aerial phenomenon. And once again, the term flying saucer or flying disc didn't come about until much later. Yes, they are. The gentleman asked, are these tunnels connected to large caverns? Yes, these large bases are basically like this Coliseum. Everything's underground. Everything's a city underground. Most of these bases both have military bases, and they have all the accoutrements of life. Remember, each one of these costs quite a bundle of dough, and some of it in our tax money, but most of it in clandestine approaches, and that's definitely undermining the country. Yes. And we built a tunnel for sewage tunnel and whatnot like that. It wasn't very big. It was about 6 feet across, and I drilled right through solid rock, right to base of under one of the hills in Portland for their new light rail. Did that in 2 days. But it was a complex. It was a small, complex tunnel. It was big enough for a man to crawl through and inspect. And I was one of the people that inspected. So yeah. What technology? A lot of this is alien technology, readapted for our own use, but a lot of it's our own ingenuity too. So you can bet. How can you tell alien technology? Well, anything that's just absolutely outlandish, like taking a oxyacetylene welding torch and trying to cut into this metal and getting nowhere, obviously would be metals research, aircraft research and the like, and different tools and products, which things that are many times the hardness of diamond or known hardened substances like borazon. Obviously, that's nothing that we came up with on our own. What we could have over a several hundred-year period. But you've got to remember, too, that the military technology is outstripping the public sector technology at the rate of 44 to 45 years of technology for every calendar year, every 12-month calendar year here. So every year going by this time in 1996, the military technology will be roughly 45 years more advanced than where we are today. So it's quite possible that way back in 1943, the U.S. Navy not only caused the ship to disappear, it literally disappeared and reappeared. Basically, military technology right now is about 1,200 years more advanced than public state technology. And computer technology right now, it's off the scale. I can't tell you. It's just right now, and employing just in black jet and stealth aircraft, the new computers are so completely advanced that we couldn't get them in the public sector for maybe another 40 or 50 years.
Transitioned from that into industrial military contracting, where I eventually found myself working out at Montauk Point through Brookhaven National Laboratories on Long Island, and found myself on this screwball project, which was known as Project Red Hawk, was the actual name, but it's popularly become called the Montauk Project, which started with the early stealth. You would know as the Philadelphia experiment. We developed the electromagnetic bottle to hide any sort of a ship in. Up to that point, it was thought that the mind of man had no sensitivity to electromagnetics, which everyone learned quite to their mistake. Yeah, the mind of man is quite sensitive to electromagnetics. And from there, research was done, which I was involved with, of how to interface the mind of man to electromagnetic systems. The idea was you could fly your fighter plane by thought. Pure thought would fly the plane or drive the ship. But it evolved into essentially a mind control device, which is what they were really looking for. They wanted to be able to feed a program into an early computer, flip a switch, and everybody would respond to it. That was what they wanted. They never got that. They never could find a, like a universal psychic signature for all humans. You would have to target each person individually. The individual targeting worked very well. Then it was discovered that since basically the project was nothing but a mind amplifier, that's all it was a mind amplifier. If the person in the input network could think of other times and fully flesh out the time in his head, this machine had the capability of generating that time, generating a vortex, different space and time. And that's what the Montauk Project eventually evolved into, a time machine. And yes, it worked. It didn't work all that well, but it worked. Many people got lost, but it did work. That, in a nutshell, is what the Montauk Project is about.
It's no easy task to break from the grip of the order, and I don't believe it's even a requirement for every man, woman, and child. I feel strongly it's more of an unstoppable permutation that will arrange itself in such a way as to become a part of a brand new order or consciousness. One that will be born of an unarguable truth, a new reference point that will render all former structure and false narratives defunct, and everything that has been part of the fabric within this juggernaut that is fast approaching. It has contributed in its own unique way, and it continues to do so. The old is fighting a desperate but losing battle. The truth is a flood it cannot stand up against, and it's being pushed out of the way, displaced by this brilliant cornerstone that has been forming for a good number of years now. I'm only one of many messengers. I'm not beholden to sponsors, commanding officers, bosses, or any other motivational forces other than my own need to share information I'm finding with like-minded individuals. I'm not always completely right. I've gone down the wrong road many times, but I've been guided back on track by others ahead of me in the process. Allow yourselves to step outside of your current level of comfort and supposed knowledge. Understand there are many things going on around the world, most of which the general public knows a very minuscule percentage. We are programmed to have a spiritual attachment to money and the attainment of the same. Though it's socially unacceptable to admit it, we attend school, paying for the final degree of that same schooling in order to attain a position worthy of an acceptable salary. A social bearing within a fiction/corporation. I think that we've become immune to our own unlimited potential by unwittingly exchanging the former for a gadget, a man-made promise of a paper moon. It's gotten us all into generations of trouble and despair, but despite it all, everything inside has remained intact. Of course, I'm trivializing everything that's been done, but there has been an accounting of it all. And now it's time for a balance to be meted out. We seem to understand that a hoodwinking has taken place, a lie has been mastered at the expense of us all, and it can be undone just as soon as we choose.
My pet girl Georgie, reading's fun, but there's something alright. Shall show no fear before the camera's eye. Flinch and notice, focus more on the kitty's delight.
Not very fun for the thousands who
stare 'em straight in the eye. Stand up straight, stare 'em straight in the eye. What will you do, Georgie? What will you